Hi everyone, my name is Maurice Gleeson and I'll be talking to you today about using Y-DNA to research your surname. Now Y-DNA tracks back along the direct male line, father, 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 and that's because it's passed only from father to son. It doesn't get passed to females, and therefore only men can do the Y-DNA test. Now, usually it's passed on broken from generation to generation, but if there's been an infidelity or if there's been a secret adoption, then we may get what you see, or what we call a switch in the DNA, or a non-paternity event, NPE, not the parent expected. So this is something we need to be aware of when we're doing Y-DNA testing, and especially if we're asking other people to do a Y-DNA test on our behalf. You have to warn them that there may be a switch in the DNA, which means that it does not necessarily go back to the person who originated the surname. So if you are particularly attached to your surname, it may be a little bit of a shock to find out that it doesn't go back to the person you were hoping it would. Just be aware of that. Now, surnames are also passed down along the direct male line. In some societies, they switch from generation to generation. So, for example, in Iceland and Thailand, they switch each generation, just like female. If you go back along the direct female line, the name will switch each generation, maiden name, maiden name, maiden name, mother, 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 mother. In Western societies, the surnames have been fixed and inherited for about the last 800 to 1,000 years. And you do get switches from time to time on the surname side of things too. So this is something to be aware of as you are doing your research, and it is important to brace yourself for surprises. Now, there are many reasons for why these switches may occur. Some of them are very, very ancient. Some people change their name to the name of the clan chief just as a means of showing allegiance to the clan chief. Adoption, fostering, a young widow remarrying could easily change her children's name by her first husband to the name of the second husband. So a lot of the reasons for why these switches occur are not something to be ashamed of. It's something that does happen and has happened on many occasions in the past. And certainly in Ireland as well, there is a completely different attitude to illegitimacy and infidelity under Brehon law, the old Irish system, than there would be today. And Anglicisation of surnames from the native Irish to the English would mean that a lot of English surnames in Ireland today would actually have a variety of different genetic origins. Again, something to be aware of. Now, if you want to start your surname research, the best thing to do is to join a surname project. And the best way to find out if there is one available is to simply Google FTDNA and your surname. And here is the home page of the Gleeson DNA project on FamilyTreeDNA. And you simply click on join in the photo and you follow the instructions. And joining a project is as simple as that. And there are over 10,000 of these surname projects on FamilyTreeDNA, so go and check if there's one for you. These projects are run by volunteer administrators like myself, and people like me will group people together on the basis of their genetic signatures, their genetic distance from each other. We will analyze the SNP markers if they've done any SNP testing, and we will put them in specific subgroups within the project. We'll then be able to do an analysis to find out where these groups are from, and we also will get some rough idea of how old these various subgroups are. In other words, how long each subgroup, the DNA in each subgroup has been associated with a particular surname. I always recommend people start low and go slow. So I would say start off with the Y-DNA 37 test from FamilyTreeDNA, and then depending on the results you can upgrade it to 67 markers or 111 markers, and this is an STR marker test. The SNP marker tests include the big Y, which really is the ultimate test to take, and that's a much more expensive test. It's not necessary in everybody. So for example, if you have a second cousin, third cousin, who has done the test already, there may be very little need for you to do the test yourself. If we take the Y chromosome and unravel it, we see that there are all these letters, and they stand for the nucleotide bases guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. G always binds to C, A always binds to T, but the real take-home message from this slide is that there are two types of DNA marker. The first one is the STR marker, and the second one is the SNP marker. And you'll see, if we look at the STR marker here, that there's a repeat of TAC 3 times. TAC, TAC, TAC. So the value for this particular STR marker would be 3. If TAC was repeated 10 times, it would be 10. If TAC was repeated 43 times, it would be 43. So this is just the reason why you see a string of numbers when you're looking at the results page of the Surname project. That's what the STR marker values are, just a string of numbers. A single nucleotide polymorphism just refers to when one letter is being changed in the sequence. So on their own, your YSTR results really tell you very little. They might help you help predict what haplogroup you're going to fit into, a haplogroup being simply a group of people who have broadly the same genetic signature, and that helps you get placed on the haplotree, which is really the tree of mankind, because there's small mutations in these markers over the course of time. One particular group moves to China and has their own particular set of mutations. One group moves to Ireland, has their own particular set of mutations, and this allows us to create a tree with a branching structure, just in the same way that we would do with our family trees. The STR signature is a string of numbers, and you can see the string of numbers there. And the SNP signature is really just a series of names, or a sequence of names, L21, DF13. So that's just the background that you need to understand Y-DNA. This is an example of the haplotree, and you can see that there's genetic Adam and all the various branches here. If we look at branch R, that now has over 25,000 branches and accounts for the majority of people in the FamilyTreeDNA database. It also helps us in researching human migration, and that's all very fascinating and interesting, and together with archaeology and linguistics has really helped us understand the story of mankind, but it's not genealogy. So let's get back to genealogy. Surnames started in Ireland around about 1,000 years ago, but it took time for them to evolve, and the surnames that have the prefix O were generally older than the surnames with the prefix Mac. So that's how surnames evolved in Ireland. In England and Scotland, they were a little bit later, around about 800 years ago or so, and in Wales it was quite patchy, and even up until the 1800s, some people did not have fixed inherited surnames. So for the purposes of our surname research, we're really looking at the last 1,000 years. Prior to that, there is the era of clans, and that is very interesting from an Irish point of view because Ireland has the oldest genealogies in Europe. We also can expect that there would have been incursions of Viking DNA, Norman DNA, and English and Scottish DNA over the course of time in Ireland, and these are the kind of genetic signatures that we'll be looking for in our Y-DNA. Not only that, but we'll also be able to link certain genetic signatures with certain geographic areas and certain surnames, and link these to the ancient genealogies. So let's get back to the genealogy and look at your matches. And what FamilyTreeDNA does when it gets your Y-DNA is it compares your string of STR number values, your string of STR numbers, with everybody else's. And there's 750,000 people in their database. And if there's a great deal of similarity, then they say that's a match, and they put it in your list of matches. And here I have 8 matches when I got my results back. And these are people who are likely to be related to me within a genealogical time frame, especially if they have the same surname. And we have the genetic distance over here on the left-hand side. And this is the number of steps away from an exact match. So a genetic distance of 0 would be an exact match. A genetic distance of 2 means 2 steps away from an exact match at the 67 marker level of comparison. So I can also look at the TIP report, which tells you roughly when the common ancestor between you and this person would be. And the other thing I'm interested in is the terminal SNP, and that tells us whether your match has done any SNP testing and what that terminal SNP is likely to be. And that terminal SNP is the SNP marker, the most downstream SNP marker that they've tested for so far. Now, the other thing that you can do with your Y-DNA is then go to the Surname project you've joined and open up the results page. And this is the results page for the Gleason project, which used to be on worldfamilies.net, which unfortunately is no longer with us. It's defunct now. It closed down a few years ago with GDPR. But what I love about this is the fact that you've got these pretty colored patterns. And these colored patterns are very similar to, they indicate the genetic signature for these various groups. So in this group, there's a lot of people with the value of 10 for that particular STR marker, 19 and 18 for this one. All of these are 24, all of these are 16. It's a very nice and obvious colored pattern. And if you compare that with the one below, you can see it's completely different. So this is what we're doing. By lumping people together who are closely genetically related, we're able to see the genetic signature, the genetic pattern in each of these subgroups within a surname project. Now, we also have a third group called lineage 3, and the colored pattern is completely different to what you see in the other two. We know that lineage 2 comes from North Tipperary. We know that lineage 3 comes from West Clare. And we know that lineage 1 comes from Suffolk in England, but also it goes back to a named individual, Thomas Gleason, born in 1609. So Y-DNA identifies different genetic groups. It tells us where a group is from, or it can do, and it can tell us how old the group is. It can identify a specific ancestor in some circumstances, and potentially it can link us to Irish clans going back before 1,000 years ago. So this is the value of joining these surname projects and going beyond just looking at your matches and contacting them. The administrators of these surname projects are a font of information, so you should have no hesitation about contacting them, asking them questions, and following any advice or guidance that they may offer. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about the Spear Surname project because this was one of my own research endeavors, and it really illustrated how useful Y-DNA can be. And for the Spear Surname project, we have our own website, and we have a FamilyTreeDNA project as well. And it started with this fantastical story that I heard from my cousin Bob, that I managed to connect with before doing any DNA testing at all. And he talked about these old wills, which helped him build this old family tree going back into the 1600s. And these Spearans were married to the Hartwell family, and their children were called Charles Hartwell Spearan and Hartwell George Spearan and so on. And the Hartwells were mayors of Limerick. and they'd been granted land there by Charles I, no, was it Charles II, for services to the crown in their fight against Oliver Cromwell. And there are currently 236 branches of the Spearin family identified, and 24 of these branches have the name Hartwell Spearin among their ancestors. Then there's this sliver of information that links us to goldsmiths called Spearing in London, and they lived on Leadenhall Street, and we've got plenty of information about them. And they were all baptized in St. Andrew under Shaft, which currently is actually under Gherkin, because it's beside that iconic building. Then there's a potential link to Cambridge, where Henry VIII granted the license to print to Nicholas Spearink, who originally came from Flanders and who was best friends with Erasmus. So this was a fantastical story that Bob spun, and I wasn't sure whether any of this was true. So we put together a family tree of all of the early Limerick Spearins here from those wills that we found, and then we put our own family trees in, and our brick walls were happening around about the 1800 time point, which is typical for Irish family trees. And then there was a gap of several generations, and then we had the early Limerick Spearins, which kind of stopped around about 1726, 1730. So we're looking at a gap of about 75 years, 3 generations, before the link up between our various family trees from Ontario, from Dublin, from New Jersey, from Limerick, from New South Wales, and from Georgia. And so the next thing that we did was we looked, there's evidence that suggests that all of these families are related. There's the different surnames could be variants of each other: Spearing, Sperrin, Spearin. There's many brick walls, all going back to the same general area of Limerick. Of course, we have the early Limerick Spearin family tree, which was in Limerick in the early 1700s. And there were similar forenames in the different families: Nicholas, William, and Luke. Nicholas being relatively rare, Luke being relatively rare, and of course Hartwell being extremely rare. But we couldn't be certain that these Limerick Spearin, these modern Limerick Spearin families linked back to the early Limerick Spearins. We thought it was likely, but we had no proof. So we did some DNA testing. And of course, I'm not a Spearin, I'm a Gleason. So in order to get Spearin Y DNA, I had to track back to my Spearin great-great-great-grandfather. I had to track then forward along all his descendant lines to find a direct male line down which Spearin Y DNA would have passed, and then I tested my third cousin. And lo and behold, several people in the group tested, and we were all closely related to each other. And this was the important lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 was beware of surname variants. Just because a surname is spelt differently does not mean you're not related. Lesson number 3 was very important. I would have abandoned this research if it had not been for DNA, because there was just no way we could have proven anything. But lesson 3 was, you're on the right track, keep going. And Y-DNA was essential for this. We wouldn't have been able to do this research otherwise. More people tested, and they all come back as more or less exact matches to everybody else. There's a couple of mutations here that you see indicated by these colored squares, but the vast majority of STR markers had exactly the same number, the same value, and this indicates that we are a very closely tight-knit group genetically. So lesson number 4, they all come from Limerick, so anyone who can trace their ancestry back to Limerick is probably a close genetic match to everyone else in genetic family 1. So conclusions so far: the Hartwell forename links certainly the Ontario family to the early Limerick Spearins, and that's very compelling evidence. DNA confirms that all the families are related. We all share a recent common ancestor, so we can all piggyback onto the longest genealogy, and that would be the Ontario Spearans, who have this Hartwell-Spearin connection, and more likely than not go back to these early Limerick Spearans, even though we are still missing 3 generations of documentary evidence. Further questions are, can we fill in these 3 or 4 missing generations and bring us back to the early Limerick Spearans? Can we even go further back and establish genetically that the link to the London Spearings, who were goldsmiths, that is realistic as well? Can we even go back to Cambridge, back into the 1400s, and can we even go back to Flanders? So these are the questions that remain to be addressed, but without Y-DNA, we would never even have thought of asking these questions. And that's why it's been so essential in this particular circumstances. And it really, I think, is a very good example of how useful Y-DNA can be in surname research. So I hope you found that of some use. Hopefully there are some hints and tips that you can take out of that, and good luck with the rest of the conference. Enjoy the rest of the videos. Thank you for watching.